Stop for just a moment, say something out loud, anything at all. Hello, your own name, whatever comes to mind. Now think about what just happened. You took air from your lungs, pushed it through a small opening in your throat, shaped it with your tongue and lips, and created sound waves that carry meaning. Sound waves that another human brain can decode instantly into thoughts, emotions, commands, stories. You just performed the most complex cognitive task any species on Earth has ever accomplished. And you did it without even thinking about it. Here's something that might genuinely blow your mind. No one knows exactly how you learned to do this, not just you personally, though that's mysterious enough, but how humans as a species ever figured out how to turn breath into words, words into sentences, sentences into everything from love letters to mathematical proofs to bedtime stories. Language is the superpower that made us human. It's older than writing, older than civilization, older than agriculture, but it's younger than you might think. Much younger. There was a time not that long ago in evolutionary terms when humans existed but couldn't speak, when our ancestors had the same basic brain capacity as us, the same social structures, the same need to communicate, but no words. Just grunts, gestures, facial expressions, a world of silence where the inside of your head stayed locked inside your head. Then something changed. Something radical and mysterious and still hotly debated among scientists today. Our ancestors learned to speak, not all at once, not through some magical moment where suddenly everyone could talk, but gradually, over thousands of years, the human vocal tract reshaped itself, the human brain rewired itself, and groups of primates who could barely make sounds more complex than a chimpanzee transformed into creatures who could describe yesterday, plan for tomorrow, lie about what happened, tell stories about things that never existed, and teach their children the accumulated wisdom of 100 generations. If you're listening to this to drift off to sleep, perfect. That's exactly what this is for. Maybe hit subscribe and tell me in the comments where you are and what language you're hearing this in, or what language you're thinking in right now. I love seeing the global reach of words, this uniquely human technology we're exploring tonight. This is a detective story. A story about piecing together clues from ancient skulls, from modern babies learning their first words, from remote tribes speaking languages no one else understands, from people who've lost the ability to speak, and people who were born without it. It's about the evolution of the human throat, the human brain, the human need to be understood. It's about grammar and gossip, about poetry and lies, about why you can teach a parrot to mimic words but never to understand them, why you can teach a chimp to use sign language but never to ask a question. And here's what makes this story perfect for falling asleep. It's vast. It's ancient. It's a mystery that spans hundreds of thousands of years, and we're still figuring it out. We're going to move slowly through deep time, watching as our ancestors transformed from creatures who communicated like other apes into creatures who could name the stars, who could promise, who could pray, who could lie, who could tell you they loved you. We'll explore what language actually is and what it isn't. We'll discover why humans in every corner of the earth, no matter how isolated, developed complex languages while no other species ever has. We'll uncover the physical changes that made speech possible and the cognitive leaps that made it necessary. Most importantly, we'll understand what makes language different from all other forms of communication. Because here's what modern linguistics has proven. Language isn't just advanced communication, it's something categorically different, a capability so unique that its emergence in human evolution is one of the greatest mysteries in all of science. But tonight, we're not here for academic debates, we're here for the story. The actual anthropological, neurological, archaeological story of how humans learned to speak. It's a mystery written in fossil skulls and baby babbles and ancient cave walls and the structure of every sentence you've ever spoken. So get comfortable. Let your jaw relax. You use dozens of muscles just to speak a single sentence. Let your breathing settle into a rhythm. We're about to travel back to a world before words and follow the journey that led to language, that led to this moment right now where you can hear a voice in your head, reading these very words, thinking thoughts that only exist because humans learn to speak. The mystery of language is about to unfold. 2 million years ago, in the forests and savannas of Africa, your ancestors existed. They walked upright. They made tools. They lived in social groups. They cooperated to hunt, to raise children, to defend against predators. They had rich, emotional lives. They felt fear, joy, anger, affection. But they didn't talk. Not in any way we would recognize as language. They made sounds, certainly. Grunts, screams, hoots, warning calls when predators approached, food calls when they discovered something edible, emotional vocalizations when they were frightened or excited or content. But these weren't words. A word is something specific. It's a sound that stands for something else. A sound that has meaning not because of what it is, but because of what it represents. A sound that everyone in your group agrees means the same thing every time you use it. Your ancient ancestors probably didn't have that yet. They communicated more like modern chimpanzees, our closest living relatives, and a window into what our distant past might have been like. Watch a group of chimps and you'll see sophisticated communication. They grunt to each other, they gesture, they use facial expressions, they have different calls for different predators, a different sound for eagle overhead versus snake on the ground. They can communicate, I want that, I'm angry, I'm scared, come here, go away. But they never say anything like, yesterday I saw an eagle by the river, or tomorrow let's go to where we saw fruit last week, or what if we made a trap for the snake? They can't talk about things that aren't immediately present. They can't describe the past or plan the future. They can't ask questions. They can't tell stories. They can't lie, not with vocalizations anyway. This is what your ancestors were probably like 2 million years ago. Sophisticated communicators by animal standards, social, cooperative, intelligent, but locked in an eternal present, unable to talk about anything beyond what was right there in front of them. Then something started changing. Not quickly. Evolution never is. Over hundreds of thousands of years, the human lineage began diverging from other apes in some very specific ways. First, the body changed. The human vocal tract, the physical equipment we use to make sounds, started looking different from a chimpanzee's. In most mammals, including chimps, the larynx sits high in the throat. This is actually pretty useful. It means you can breathe and swallow at the same time, which is handy when you're eating. Baby humans have this configuration too, which is why infants can nurse and breathe simultaneously. But in adult humans, something strange happens. The larynx drops lower in the throat. This creates a longer vocal tract, a bigger resonating chamber, and the physical ability to make a much wider range of sounds. It also creates a problem. With a lowered larynx, you can choke. Food can go down the wrong pipe. Humans are the only species that commonly chokes to death on food. Every year, thousands of people die, because our throats are badly designed for eating. So why did evolution keep this design? Why would natural selection preserve a feature that literally kills people? Because it allowed us to speak. That lowered larynx, that longer vocal tract, gave humans the physical ability to create dozens of distinct sounds, vowels with different qualities, consonants formed in different parts of the mouth, the building blocks of language. But physical ability alone doesn't explain language. Parrots can mimic human speech perfectly. Their vocal tracts allow them to make all the same sounds we do, but parrots don't have language. They're just copying sounds without understanding. The real change was happening in the brain. Look at a human skull from 2 million years ago, what scientists call Homo habilis, or Homo erectus. The brain is already larger than a chimp's, but it's not shaped quite like a modern human brain. Over the next 2 million years, human brains didn't just get bigger, they got reorganized. Certain areas expanded dramatically, particularly areas in the left hemisphere, Broca's area near the front, which controls the physical production of speech, Wernicke's area, near the back, which handles understanding language, the arcuate fasciculus, a bundle of nerve fibers connecting these two regions. We know these areas are crucial for language because when they're damaged, specific types of language problems emerge. Damage to Broca's area, and you can understand speech but struggle to produce it. You know what you want to say but can't get the words out. Damage to Wernicke's area, and you can speak fluently, but the words don't make sense. The grammatical structure is there, but the meaning is scrambled. These specialized language regions exist in modern human brains. They don't exist in other apes, at least not in the same way they were evolving in our ancestors' skulls over hundreds of thousands of years, preparing the ground for something unprecedented in the history of life on Earth. But brain anatomy alone still doesn't explain language. You need the physical equipment, the vocal tract, the brain structures. But you also need something else, something harder to see in the fossil record. You need a reason. Why would our ancestors invest so much evolutionary energy in developing the ability to speak? What problem was language solving? This is where the story gets really interesting, because language isn't just useful for the things we use it for today. Teaching, planning, storytelling, arguing, joking. Language may have evolved for something more fundamental. Some researchers think language evolved for social bonding. In large groups of primates, social grooming, picking through each other's fur, serves as social glue. It builds alliances, establishes hierarchies, maintains friendships. But grooming takes time. You can only groom one or two individuals at once. As human groups got larger, and there's evidence that human social groups were getting much larger than typical primate groups, grooming couldn't keep up. You can't maintain social bonds with 50 people by personally grooming each one every day. There simply aren't enough hours, but you can talk to them. Language might have started as vocal grooming, a way to maintain social bonds in larger groups. Gossip, in other words, talking about who's doing what with whom, who can be trusted, who's reliable, who's not. The social glue that holds large groups together. Other researchers think language evolved for cooperative hunting or tool making, complex tasks that require coordination, planning, and teaching. You go left, I'll go right, we'll trap the animal between us, requires language. If you strike the stone at this angle, it will flake into a blade, is much easier to teach with words than by demonstration alone. Still others think language emerged as a way to share knowledge across generations. Humans accumulate cultural knowledge, information about where to find water in different seasons, which plants are edible, how to make fire where dangerous animals den. Without language, each generation has to learn everything through personal experience. With language, you can teach your children everything your parents taught you and everything you've learned, compressing generations of hard-won knowledge into stories and instructions. The truth is, probably all of these things and more. Language is so useful for so many different purposes that once it started emerging, natural selection would have strongly favored any improvements to the ability. But even with the right vocal tract and the right brain structures and strong selective pressure, there's still one more mystery. How did the first words actually emerge? This is the hardest question of all, because language can't exist in isolation. A single word by itself is useless. You need other people who understand what that word means. You need agreement, convention, a shared system. How do you get from a world with no words to a world with words? How does that transition happen? Picture your ancestors around a fire maybe 200,000 years ago. They're anatomically modern humans, Homo sapiens, with the same basic vocal equipment and brain structure you have. But they don't have language yet. Not fully formed language anyway. They communicate through gestures, facial expressions, emotional vocalizations. They probably have some consistent sound-meaning pairings, certain grunts that reliably mean certain things, proto-words maybe, but not yet a system of grammar, not yet the ability to combine sounds in infinite ways to express infinite meanings. Then one person makes a sound, a specific sound associated with a specific thing, maybe a food source, a location, a type of animal. They make this sound consistently. Others begin to recognize it, to understand it, to use it themselves. More sounds follow, more associations. Slowly, over generations, a vocabulary builds. But vocabulary alone isn't language. Language requires grammar, rules for combining words, ways of indicating relationships between concepts. This is the transition that nobody fully understands. How did grammar emerge? How did humans develop the ability to not just string words together, but to structure them in ways that convey complex, hierarchical relationships? The man bites the dog means something completely different from the dog bites the man, even though both sentences use exactly the same words. Grammar is what makes that difference meaningful. Every human language that's ever been studied has grammar. Even isolated tribes who've never had contact with the outside world speak languages with complex grammatical structures. Deaf children, if they're not taught a formal sign language, will spontaneously invent their own sign language with grammar. This suggests that the capacity for grammar is somehow built into the human brain. We're not born knowing English or Chinese or Swahili, but we are born with the ability to acquire whatever grammatical system we're exposed to. This is language. Not just words, but words structured by grammar, allowing humans to express thoughts of infinite complexity and subtlety, to communicate about things that aren't present, to teach, to lie, to imagine, to create shared realities through nothing but sound. And somewhere between 200,000 and 50,000 years ago, your ancestors made this leap. The exact timing is fiercely debated, but at some point, humans went from communicating like other animals to speaking in ways no other species ever has. The age of silence was ending. The age of language was beginning. So when did it actually happen? When did humans first speak? This might seem like a simple question, but it's one of the most contentious debates in all of anthropology. Scientists have been arguing about it for decades, and they still don't agree. Part of the problem is that language doesn't fossilize. We can dig up ancient stone tools and see how technology evolved. We can study ancient bones and track how bodies changed. But language is sounds in the air, thoughts in the mind, social agreements that leave no physical trace. We have to piece the story together from indirect clues, from skull shapes that tell us about brain structure and vocal anatomy, from archaeological evidence of complex behavior that would be difficult without language, from genetic studies of when certain language-related genes evolved, from the study of modern languages and how they change over time. And from these clues, two main theories have emerged. The first theory says language is very old, maybe as much as 2 million years old. According to this view, language evolved gradually alongside increasing brain size and tool complexity. As soon as our ancestors started making sophisticated stone tools, coordinating group hunts, maintaining large social networks, they must have had some form of language. Maybe primitive at first, but continuously evolving and improving over hundreds of thousands of years. The second theory says language is much more recent, maybe only 50,000 to 100,000 years old. According to this view, anatomically modern humans existed for a long time without true language. They communicated, certainly, but not with the full grammatical complexity we see in modern languages. Then, relatively suddenly in evolutionary terms, something clicked. The cognitive capacity for full language emerged, and everything changed. This second theory has a name, the Great Leap Forward. It's based on archaeological evidence that something dramatic happened in human behavior around 50,000 to 70,000 years ago. Before this time, the archaeological record is fairly static. Yes, humans made tools. Yes, they controlled fire, lived in shelters, hunted large game, but tool designs barely changed for tens of thousands of years. There's little evidence of art, personal ornaments, long-distance trade, ritual burial, or other behaviors we associate with fully modern human cognition. Then, around 50,000 years ago, everything explodes. Suddenly, the archaeological record is full of innovation. New, more sophisticated stone tools, bone tools and needles, jewelry and personal ornaments, cave paintings and carved figurines, musical instruments, evidence of long-distance trade networks, elaborate ritual burials suggesting complex belief systems. To many researchers, this looks like the signature of language finally emerging in its full form. Because all these behaviors, art, trade, ritual, technological innovation, become much easier to explain if you have language. You can teach complex techniques. You can negotiate trades. You can share stories and myths that bind groups together. You can plan complex projects. But other researchers aren't convinced. They point out that even before 50,000 years ago, humans were doing things that seemed to require language. They were living in structured societies, raising children who needed years of teaching and care, coordinating group hunts of dangerous animals, making tools that required multiple steps and planning. Could you really do all that without language? Maybe, but it would be remarkably difficult. And there's another line of evidence, the genetics of language. In 2001, researchers discovered a gene called FOXP2, the first gene identified with a clear role in language. People with mutations in this gene have severe difficulties with speech and language. They can't coordinate the fine motor movements required for speech, and they struggle with grammar. When scientists compared the human version of FOXP2 to the version in other primates, they found something fascinating. The human version differs from the chimp version by just 2 amino acids, 2 tiny changes in one protein. But those 2 changes seem to be crucial. When researchers engineered mice to have the human version of FOXP2, the mice developed more complex vocalizations and enhanced learning abilities. Using molecular clock dating, techniques that estimate when genetic changes occurred based on mutation rates, researchers calculated that the human version of FOXP2 became widespread in the human population somewhere between 50,000 and 200,000 years ago. That's a huge range, and it doesn't pin down exactly when language emerged, but it suggests that important genetic changes related to language happened relatively recently in evolutionary terms. Here's another clue: the hyoid bone. This is a small horseshoe-shaped bone in your throat. It doesn't connect to any other bones. It's suspended by muscles and ligaments. It anchors the tongue and provides attachment points for muscles involved in swallowing and speech. In most mammals, including other apes, the hyoid bone has a certain shape. In modern humans, it has a different shape, one that's better adapted for the complex tongue movements required for speech. In 1989, archaeologists found a hyoid bone from a Neanderthal who lived about 60,000 years ago, and it looked like a modern human hyoid. This suggested that Neanderthals had the physical capacity for speech. More recently, researchers have found evidence that even earlier human ancestors, Homo heidelbergensis, who lived around 400,000 years ago, had ear structures suggesting they could hear the range of sounds involved in human speech. So the physical equipment for language was in place fairly early. But that doesn't necessarily mean fully modern language existed. Having a larynx that can make speech sounds doesn't mean you're making them in the systematic, grammatical way that defines true language. Think about it this way. You have the physical equipment to be an opera singer. You have vocal cords, a larynx, a tongue, lungs. But unless you've trained for years, you can't sing opera. The equipment is necessary, but not sufficient. Similarly, our ancestors might have had the physical capacity for speech long before they developed the cognitive capacity for true language. So when did that cognitive leap happen? The honest answer is we don't know for certain, but here's what seems likely based on all the evidence. The groundwork for language was laid over millions of years. Brain expansion, vocal tract changes, social group enlargement, these were the prerequisites, the necessary conditions. Somewhere between 300,000 and 100,000 years ago, anatomically modern humans emerged with brain structures and vocal anatomy essentially identical to ours. They had the hardware for language, but the software, the cognitive ability to use that hardware for true grammatical language, might have taken longer to develop. Maybe there was a long period where early humans had proto-language, larger vocabularies than other apes, maybe some simple grammatical structures, but not yet the full complexity of modern language. Then, sometime between 100,000 and 50,000 years ago, something crystallized. Maybe a genetic mutation, maybe accumulated cultural innovations, maybe the pressures of larger group sizes or new environmental challenges, maybe all of these things together. The cognitive capacity for full language emerged, and once it existed, it spread rapidly. Because language is so powerful, so useful, that groups with it would have had enormous advantages over groups without it. They could coordinate better, teach better, plan better, innovate faster. They could share knowledge across generations in ways no other species could. They could create shared myths and beliefs that united large groups of genetically unrelated individuals into cooperative societies. In evolutionary terms, language might be the ultimate adaptive advantage, more important than claws or speed or strength, because language allows humans to adapt culturally rather than biologically. Instead of waiting thousands of years for natural selection to change your body, you can share knowledge within a generation about how to survive in new environments. Within a few tens of thousands of years after true language emerged, humans had spread across the entire globe. They lived in tropical rainforests and Arctic tundra. They hunted mammoths and gathered coconuts. They developed thousands of distinct cultures, each with its own tools, traditions, and beliefs. And every single one of them, no matter how isolated, no matter how different their environment or lifestyle, spoke a complex language with full grammatical structure. Language had become human nature. Here's something remarkable. Every human society ever discovered has language. Every single one. Not a simple language versus a complex language. All human languages are complex. A remote tribe in the Amazon rainforest that's never had contact with the outside world speaks a language just as sophisticated, just as capable of expressing complex thoughts as English or Mandarin or Arabic. There's no such thing as a primitive language. This is one of the most important discoveries of modern linguistics. Languages spoken by hunter-gatherer societies with simple technology are not simpler than languages spoken in industrialized nations. In some ways, they're actually more complex. They often have more verb tenses, more precise ways of indicating relationships, more intricate grammatical structures. And here's what's even more remarkable. All these languages, despite their surface differences, share certain deep similarities. In the 1950s, a linguist named Noam Chomsky proposed a revolutionary idea. Humans are born with an innate capacity for language, not for English or Japanese specifically, but for language in general. We have what he called universal grammar, a set of principles and patterns built into the human brain that makes learning language possible. This was a radical claim at the time. The prevailing view was that children learn language the same way they learn anything else, through observation, imitation, and reinforcement. You hear words, you repeat them, you get corrected when you're wrong, and gradually you learn to speak. But Chomsky pointed out something that's obvious once you think about it. Children don't learn language through simple imitation, they create language. Watch a young child learning to speak. They don't just repeat sentences they've heard, they generate new sentences they've never heard before, following grammatical rules they've never been explicitly taught. A 3-year-old might say, "I go to the park," instead of "I went to the park." They've never heard anyone say "goed." They're applying a grammatical rule, added to make past tense, in a creative but incorrect way. This is called overgeneralization, and it's evidence that children aren't just mimicking, they're extracting rules from the language they hear and applying those rules to create new utterances. And they do this incredibly quickly, with surprisingly little input. By age 4 or 5, most children can speak their native language fluently, understanding complex grammatical structures that adults struggle to learn when acquiring a second language. How is this possible? Chomsky's answer: because the basic structure of language is built into the human brain. We're not learning language from scratch. We're discovering which specific language our environment uses, plugging the vocabulary and particular rules of English or Swahili or Cantonese into a pre-existing grammatical framework. This explains why certain patterns appear in every human language. Every language has nouns and verbs, ways of referring to things and ways of referring to actions. Every language has ways of forming questions, negatives, and commands. Every language can express past, present, and future. Every language has recursive structure, the ability to embed clauses within clauses, allowing sentences of theoretically infinite length. Every language distinguishes between subjects and objects, between I see you and you see me. Every language has pronouns. Every language has ways of indicating possession, of expressing numbers, of describing spatial relationships. The details vary enormously. Some languages put verbs at the end of sentences, others at the beginning. Some mark tense on verbs, others use separate words. Some use lots of word endings to show grammatical relationships. Others rely more on word order. But underneath this diversity, the same basic organizational principles exist. All human languages are variations on a theme, the theme being the underlying structure that makes human language fundamentally different from all other forms of animal communication. And here's the kicker. This structure seems to be specific to humans. We've tried to teach language to other apes, our closest evolutionary relatives. And while chimps and gorillas can learn to use symbols, can build vocabularies of hundreds of signs, they never develop anything resembling human grammar. The most famous case is a bonobo named Kanzi, who learned to use a keyboard with symbols representing words. Kanzi could recognize over 3,000 spoken English words and could use his symbol keyboard to request things, comment on his environment, even express basic preferences and emotions. But Kanzi never asked a question, never used recursive structure, never combined symbols in the creative, generative way that even young human children do naturally. He could point to symbols for kanzi and go and outdoors to request going outside. But he never created complex sentences like, "Can we go outdoors after I eat?" He never talked about past events or future plans in the way humans do effortlessly. This isn't because kanzi isn't smart. Bonobos are highly intelligent. It's because they don't have the specific cognitive architecture for grammar that humans have. That architecture appears to be unique to our species. It emerged sometime in our evolutionary history, and it allowed something unprecedented: infinite creativity from finite means. With a vocabulary of just a few thousand words and a handful of grammatical rules, you can generate sentences that have never been spoken before in the history of the human species. You're almost certainly reading sentences right now that no one has ever formed in exactly this way before. That's the power of universal grammar. It's not that all languages are the same, they're clearly not. It's that all languages are possible permutations within a constrained space defined by human cognitive architecture, and this constrained space appears to be innate. Children don't need to be taught grammar explicitly. They extract it from the language around them with remarkable speed and accuracy. There's a heartbreaking but scientifically important case that demonstrates this. Feral children who grow up without exposure to language during the critical period of language acquisition. The most famous case is a girl called Jeannie, discovered in 1970 in Los Angeles. She'd been horrifically abused, kept in isolation in a small room from the age of 20 months to 13 years. During that entire period, she had minimal human contact and virtually no exposure to language. When she was discovered, she couldn't speak. Researchers worked with her for years, trying to help her acquire language. She learned vocabulary, hundreds of words. She could communicate basic needs and ideas, but she never developed grammar. She never learned to form proper sentences. Her utterances remained stuck at the level of 2 or 3 words strung together. Applesauce buy store. Want go bus ride. Why? Because she'd missed the critical period. There appears to be a window in childhood, roughly from birth to puberty, when the human brain is particularly primed to acquire language. If you don't learn a language during this period, you never fully acquire the grammatical structures that define human language. This critical period isn't just for learning a first language, it applies to second languages too, which is why adults struggle to learn new languages while children pick them up effortlessly. But here's what's fascinating. Even children who miss the critical period for spoken language will create language if given the opportunity. In Nicaragua, in the 1970s and 80s, deaf children were brought together in schools for the first time. These children had grown up in isolation, each in their own family, without access to any formal sign language. They'd developed simple gestural systems at home, what's called home sign, but nothing like a full language. When these children came together, something remarkable happened. They started creating a sign language from scratch. The first generation developed a basic pidgin, a simplified communication system with limited grammar. But the second generation, the younger children who learned from the first, transformed it into a full language with complete grammatical structure. This is called Nicaraguan Sign Language, and it's one of the only times linguists have been able to observe the birth of a new language in real time. And what they saw confirmed Chomsky's theory. Given minimal input, human children will spontaneously create grammar. The capacity for language is built into us. We can't help but use it. Put children together, even children who've been deprived of language, and they'll create language. This is what makes humans unique among all species on Earth. We're the language animal. It's so fundamental to who we are that we can't imagine human existence without it. And once it emerged in our evolutionary history, it changed everything. Language didn't just allow humans to communicate better. It fundamentally transformed what it means to be human. Think about what language makes possible. First, it allows teaching across generations. An individual human life is short. In prehistoric times, maybe 30 or 40 years, if you were lucky. That's not much time to figure out everything you need to know to survive. Without language, each generation has to learn mostly through trial and error. You watch others, you imitate, you experiment. Some knowledge can be passed down this way. Chimps teach their young which tools to use to crack nuts, for example, but it's limited, slow, inefficient. With language, suddenly you can compress decades of accumulated knowledge into a few hours of instruction. Don't eat those berries, they're poison. If you're lost, follow the river downstream. When hunting antelope, they always run uphill. So position yourself above them. Your parents can teach you what their parents taught them, and you can add what you've learned and teach it to your children. Knowledge compounds across generations. This is cultural evolution, and it's far faster than biological evolution. With biological evolution, beneficial traits spread through genetics, through reproduction across thousands of years. With cultural evolution powered by language, beneficial ideas can spread through a population in a single generation. Second, language allows planning and coordination. Without language, you're stuck in the present. You can't discuss what you'll do tomorrow or next week. You can't coordinate complex activities that require precise timing and role assignment. With language, humans could plan hunts requiring coordination among dozens of individuals, build structures that took months to complete, organize migrations to new territories, create trade networks spanning hundreds of miles. Third, language enables abstraction. Most animal communication is concrete. It's about immediate threats, food, mating, social dominance, danger here, food there, I'm in charge. But language lets you talk about things that aren't physically present, about the past and the future, about things that are far away, about things that might happen but haven't yet, about things that will never happen, hypotheticals, counterfactuals, possibilities. You can say, if it rains tomorrow, we should hunt in the forest instead of the plains. That sentence involves multiple abstractions, the future, a conditional, alternatives, reasoning about cause and effect. This ability to think and communicate about abstract concepts transforms cognition itself. Many researchers believe language doesn't just express thought, it shapes thought. That the categories your language creates actually influence how you think about the world. This is a controversial idea, but there's evidence for it. Languages differ in how they categorize colors, spatial relationships, time, gender, number. And speakers of different languages sometimes think about these concepts differently. For example, in English we say, the cat is on the table. The relationship is on, a vertical relationship. In some languages, you'd use different words depending on whether the cat is resting on the table or actively climbing onto it. Speakers of those languages pay attention to that distinction in a way English speakers typically don't. Fourth, language enables group identity and social cohesion. Every human group has stories, creation myths, heroic legends, moral parables. These stories, transmitted through language, create shared beliefs and values. They define who we are versus who they are. This might sound negative, and certainly it can be when it leads to intergroup conflict. But it's also what allows humans to cooperate in large groups with people we're not related to. Other primates cooperate mainly with kin and a few close allies. Human cooperation extends to hundreds, thousands, millions of people. We cooperate with strangers because we share beliefs, values, norms, all transmitted and reinforced through language. Companies, nations, religions, political movements, all these forms of large-scale cooperation are built on shared stories and concepts that exist only in language. We are Americans. We follow God's law. Workers of the world unite. None of these concepts exist in physical reality. They're collective fictions created by language, but they're powerful enough to inspire cooperation, sacrifice, even warfare. Fifth, language enables innovation through the combination of ideas. Once you have words for concepts, you can combine those concepts in new ways. You can think, what if we take this material and use it for that purpose? What if we combine these two techniques? Much innovation isn't the invention of something from scratch. It's the recombination of existing elements in novel ways. And language makes that much easier, because words let you manipulate concepts mentally before trying them out physically. Finally, and perhaps most profoundly, language gives humans something unique: the ability to be alone together. Other social animals need physical proximity for social bonding, grooming, playing, simple co-presence. But humans can feel connected through shared stories, shared songs, shared conversations about people and events none of them directly experienced. You can feel close to someone because you've exchanged words, even if you've never touched them. You can feel connected to people who lived centuries ago because you've read their words. You can feel part of a community of millions you'll never meet because You share a language, a set of stories, a way of understanding the world. Language creates what you might call an extended social mind. The thoughts in your head aren't entirely your own. They're shaped by every conversation you've ever had, every book you've ever read, every word you've ever heard. Your thinking is collaborative, social, distributed across the network of speakers of your language. This is the power of language. It took humans from just another species of African primate to the dominant force on the planet, not through physical strength or speed, but through shared knowledge, coordinated action, abstract reasoning, and social cooperation at scales no other species has ever achieved. And it all depends on something so simple, so fundamental, that you do it without thinking, combining sounds in structured ways to represent meanings. As you lie there now in the dark or dimness, preparing for sleep, your mind is still doing it. You're hearing these words, decoding them automatically, extracting meanings, forming thoughts. Language is running in the background of your consciousness like an operating system, so essential that you only notice it when it fails. Tomorrow you'll wake and immediately start using language again, talking to others, reading, writing, thinking in words. It will feel completely natural, completely effortless. But every time you speak a sentence, every time you understand one, you're performing a miracle. A uniquely human miracle that emerged sometime in our evolutionary past and transformed a species of apes into something unprecedented in the history of life on Earth. Here's another remarkable fact. There are approximately 7,000 languages spoken on Earth today, 7,000 different ways of putting sounds together to create meanings, 7,000 distinct grammars, vocabularies, sound systems, 7,000 unique lenses through which different groups of humans understand and describe the world. And this is after thousands of years of languages dying out, being replaced, merging, diverging. At the peak of human linguistic diversity, probably around 10,000 years ago before the spread of agriculture and empires, there might have been 3 or 4 times as many languages. Think about what this means. Language emerged once in human evolution. We all descended from a common ancestral population that developed the capacity for speech. And yet, within just tens of thousands of years, that single capacity diversified into thousands of mutually unintelligible communication systems. You can't understand Mandarin if you only speak English. A speaker of Arabic can't understand Quechua. Someone who knows Hindi can't comprehend Navajo. These languages are so different that without translation, speakers literally cannot communicate. How did this happen? How did language diversify so quickly and so thoroughly? The answer lies in how languages change. Languages are not static. They're constantly evolving, shifting, transforming. New words are added, old words fall out of use, pronunciations drift, grammar structures shift, meanings change. This happens for lots of reasons. Young people use language differently than old people, creating generational differences. Different social groups develop different speaking styles. Contact with other languages introduces new words and structures. Geographic isolation allows different populations to drift in different directions. Over time, these changes accumulate. A single language spoken by one group splits into dialects. As populations separate, the dialects become more and more different. Eventually, they're different enough that speakers can no longer understand each other. What was one language has become 2. Multiply this process over tens of thousands of years, across thousands of human populations spreading across the globe, and you get thousands of languages. Linguists have tried to trace languages back to their origins, to reconstruct the family trees of languages the way biologists reconstruct the family trees of species. This has been remarkably successful for recent history. We know, for example, that Spanish, French, Italian, Portuguese, and Romanian all descended from Latin. We can see the systematic similarities, trace the sound changes, reconstruct the path from ancient Rome to modern Europe. We know that English, German, Dutch, and the Scandinavian languages all descended from a common Germanic ancestor. We can trace Hindi, Persian, Russian, Greek, and many other languages back to a common ancestor called Proto-Indo-European, spoken somewhere around 6,000 years ago, probably in the steppes of Central Asia. This family of languages, the Indo-European family, is now spoken by nearly half the world's population, from Iceland to Sri Lanka, from Ireland to Bangladesh. The spread of Indo-European languages is one of the greatest linguistic success stories in history, driven by migrations, conquests, and the development of agriculture. But linguistic reconstruction can only go back so far. After about 10,000 years, the changes accumulate to the point where relationships become impossible to prove. Languages change so much that you can't tell anymore whether two languages are related or just coincidentally similar. So, we don't know if all human languages ultimately descended from a single proto-human language spoken by our common ancestors, or if language emerged multiple times independently in different populations, or if an early form of language spread with humans out of Africa and then diversified so much that the original relationships are now unrecoverable. Many linguists believe all languages do ultimately share a common origin, that language emerged once, and all modern languages descended from that original human language. But we may never be able to prove it, because the evidence has been erased by tens of thousands of years of linguistic change. What we can see, though, is that linguistic diversity has always been enormous. Even within relatively small areas, huge linguistic variation exists. Papua New Guinea, a country smaller than California, is home to over 800 languages. The island of New Guinea as a whole has more linguistic diversity than all of Europe. Some valleys in the highland interior have different languages spoken just a few miles apart. This is what happens when human populations remain relatively isolated for long periods. Each develops its own language, and that language becomes part of group identity. Speaking the same language means you're part of us. Speaking a different language means you're part of them. But linguistic diversity is rapidly declining. Of the 7,000 languages spoken today, about half are endangered. They're spoken by small, aging populations, and they're not being transmitted to the next generation. Every 2 weeks, on average, a language dies. The last speaker passes away, and with them an entire unique way of structuring thought, describing reality, organizing concepts disappears forever. This is a tremendous loss. Each language represents thousands of years of cultural evolution, a unique perspective on the world, irreplaceable knowledge about local environments, plants, animals, weather patterns, social relationships. When a language dies, we lose poetry that cannot be translated, jokes that only work in that language, concepts that don't exist in any other tongue, grammatical structures that reveal different ways of organizing thought. Many endangered languages are spoken by indigenous peoples whose communities are being disrupted by globalization, migration, economic pressure. Young people are shifting to major languages, English, Spanish, Mandarin, Arabic, because those are the languages of education, employment, media, prestige. This is understandable. People make rational choices. If speaking English or Spanish opens doors for your children, you teach them English or Spanish. If your own language is spoken by only a few hundred people in one remote area, it's hard to maintain. But linguists around the world are working to document endangered languages before they disappear, recording speakers, analyzing grammar, preserving texts, creating archives of human linguistic diversity before it vanishes, because each language is not just a tool for communication, it's a repository of human creativity, a unique experiment in how to map sounds onto meanings, a different solution to the problem of how to structure grammar. And studying this diversity teaches us about language itself, about the range of possibilities within universal grammar, about the outer limits of what human language can be. Some languages have sounds that seem impossible to English speakers. Click consonants in some African languages produced by making clicking sounds with your tongue. Ejective consonants in some Native American languages produced by closing your throat and releasing air sharply. Tone in Mandarin and many other languages where the same syllable with different pitches means completely different words. Some languages have grammatical categories that English lacks entirely. Evidentials in some Amazonian languages required markers on verbs indicating how you know the information you're reporting. Did you see it yourself? Did someone tell you? Did you infer it from evidence? The grammar forces you to specify. Some languages have incredibly complex verb systems with dozens of required markers for person, number, tense, aspect, mood, voice. Others have relatively simple verb systems but complex noun systems with many cases marking different grammatical relationships. The diversity is staggering, and yet, underneath it all, there are those universal patterns, nouns and verbs, subject and object, questions and negatives, recursion and embedding. All human languages, despite their surface differences, are variations on the same deep theme. The theme of human cognition, human social needs, human ways of understanding and describing reality. As languages die, we lose variation. We lose experiments in the space of linguistic possibility, but we haven't yet lost the universal human capacity for language itself. As long as humans exist, as long as children are born with the ability to learn language, as long as communities need to communicate, language will endure. It might become less diverse, might be dominated by a few major languages, but it won't disappear, because language is too fundamental to human nature. It's not just something we do, it's part of what we are. As you drift deeper towards sleep, let's take one more journey. Not backward into the past this time, but forward into the future. What will language look like in 100 years, in 1,000 years, in 10,000 years? Languages are changing right now as you listen to these words. New words are being coined, old words are falling out of use, pronunciations are shifting, grammar is evolving in subtle ways. English today is not the same as English 100 years ago. Read a newspaper from the 1920s and you'll notice differences. Go back 500 years to Shakespeare, and the differences become more pronounced. Go back 1,000 years to Old English, and it's essentially a foreign language. Whet. We gardena in Geerdegum Theodsininga Thrim Gefrunom. That's the opening of Beowulf, written in Old English around the year 1000. If you speak modern English, you probably can't understand it without translation. Yet it's the same language, just separated by a millennium of change. The same process that transformed Latin into Spanish, French, and Italian is transforming English right now. In 1,000 years, the English spoken in London, New York, Sydney, and Mumbai might have diverged so much that their mutually unintelligible, distinct languages descended from a common ancestor. Or maybe not, because something new is happening with language, something that's never happened before in human history: global communication technology. For most of human history, languages evolved in relative isolation. You spoke the language of your community, your region. You might never in your life speak to someone from a different language community. This isolation allowed dialects to diverge, languages to split, diversity to flourish. But it also meant that linguistic changes were local, idiosyncratic, path-dependent based on the particular history of each community. Now, for the first time, humans around the world can communicate instantly across vast distances. The internet, satellite television, social media, international travel, all of this creates linguistic contact on an unprecedented scale. This is having two opposite effects. On one hand, it's accelerating language death. Minority languages are under pressure like never before. When you can access the entire internet in English, but only a few websites in your native language, when all the movies and TV shows and songs are in Spanish or Mandarin, when economic opportunities require speaking a major language, the pressure to shift to that major language is enormous. We're moving toward a world dominated by a few major languages. English as the global language of business, science, and the internet. Mandarin as the language of the world's largest population. Spanish across Latin America. Arabic across the Middle East. Hindi across South Asia. This loss of diversity is tragic, but it's also arguably inevitable given the economic and social pressures of globalization. On the other hand, global communication is also creating new forms of linguistic diversity. English is fragmenting into multiple world Englishes: British English, American English, Indian English, Nigerian English, Singapore English, each with its own vocabulary, pronunciation, even grammar. These varieties are in constant contact through media and the internet, but they're also each evolving in their own directions. The internet is creating new genres of language use. Text messaging has spawned a written style that mimics speech more than traditional writing does, with abbreviations, emojis, novel punctuation usage. Social media has created new conventions for how we construct identity and present ourselves through language. And then there's the question of technology's direct impact on language itself. We're developing AI systems that can understand and generate language, translation tools that can convert between languages in real time, text-to-speech systems that sound increasingly human, speech recognition that can transcribe spoken language with high accuracy. What happens to language in a world where everyone can communicate with everyone else regardless of what language they speak? Because AI handles the translation invisibly? Do we still need to learn foreign languages? Does diversity matter as much if the barriers to communication are erased? And what about direct brain-to-brain communication? Some researchers are working on brain-computer interfaces that could eventually allow thoughts to be transmitted directly from one brain to another, bypassing language entirely. Would that make language obsolete? Or would language remain essential because it's not just about transmitting information, it's about constructing identity, building relationships, creating art? These are science fiction questions today, but they're questions that might have real answers in the coming centuries. What seems most likely is that language will continue to evolve, as it always has, adapting to new technologies, new social structures, new ways of living. But the fundamental capacity for language, the human ability to take breath and turn it into meaning, to construct grammatical structures, to combine finite elements in infinite ways, that seems unlikely to change, because it's built into the structure of the human brain. Unless we fundamentally alter human biology, which is itself not impossible in the long term, language will remain central to human existence. And even if technology changes how we communicate, even if AI or brain interfaces or something we can't yet imagine transforms the mechanics of communication, the human need to be understood, to share our inner lives, to connect with others through meaning, that will endure. Because that's what language is ultimately for. Not just to convey information, though it does that. Not just to coordinate action, though it does that too. But to reach across the gap between one consciousness and another. To say, I am here, I exist, I think, I feel, I am like you. Every time you speak, you're performing that act of connection. You're taking something private, a thought in your head, and making it public, shareable, potentially immortal. The words you speak might be forgotten immediately, or they might be remembered for a lifetime, or they might be written down and survive for centuries, connecting your consciousness to the consciousnesses of people not yet born. This is the miracle of language, not just that we can do it, but that we can't help but do it, that we're compelled to use it, that human life without language is almost unimaginable. As you lie here, at the very edge of sleep, there's one more thing to consider. Right now, you're probably hearing a voice in your head. Not my voice, though maybe that's there too, but your own internal voice, the stream of language that constitutes much of your conscious thought. That voice is talking to you constantly, narrating your experiences, planning your future, remembering your past, commenting on your perceptions, arguing with itself, rehearsing conversations, forming opinions. This internal monologue is so constant, so familiar that you might not even notice it most of the time. But it's there, and it's language. You think in words, not exclusively. You also think in images, emotions, sensations, abstract patterns that have no linguistic form. But much of your conscious thought is linguistic. You talk to yourself, inside your head, constantly. This is unique to humans. As far as we can tell, other animals don't have internal monologues. They think, certainly. They remember, plan, feel, perceive. But they don't narrate their own experience to themselves in language, because they don't have language. The voice in your head is a side effect of being a linguistic creature. Once you have the ability to use language externally to communicate with others, you automatically get the ability to use it internally to organize your own thoughts. And this internal use of language might be just as important as the external use. It allows you to reflect on your own thinking, to plan in detail, to rehearse actions mentally before trying them physically, to construct complex arguments and examine them from multiple angles. Some researchers think that human consciousness itself, the particular quality of human self-awareness, might depend on language. That the sense of being a self, an I that persists through time and observes its own thoughts, might be constructed through the internal use of language. Whether that's true or not, language clearly shapes the texture of human inner life in profound ways. And now, as sleep approaches, that inner voice is probably getting quieter, more fragmented, less coherent. Thoughts are becoming dreamlike, loosely associated, less bound by grammar and logic. This is what happens when you fall asleep. The linguistic part of your brain starts to shut down. You stop narrating your experience to yourself. The voice in your head falls silent, and yet, even in dreams, language sometimes appears. You might dream conversations, dream reading, dream speaking, because language is so deeply woven into human cognition that even unconscious thought sometimes takes linguistic form. But for now, let that voice grow quiet. Let the words fade. Let the sentences become fragments. The fragments become single words. The words become sounds without meanings. You've carried language with you throughout your entire life. From the first words you spoke as a toddler, through all the conversations and readings and writings and thoughts of your years, to this moment now, language has been your constant companion. It connected you to your parents, your friends, your teachers, your lovers. It gave you access to the accumulated knowledge of humanity. It allowed you to work, to learn, to love, to argue, to joke, to explain yourself, to understand others. Tomorrow you'll wake and immediately start using it again, this remarkable ability that makes you human, this evolutionary gift that emerged in your ancestors' brains tens of thousands of years ago and made everything you are possible. But tonight, let it rest. Let the miracle of language fade into the background as you drift into sleep. You don't need words right now. You don't need sentences or grammar or meaning. You just need rest. And when you wake, language will be there, waiting for you. The words will come back. The voice in your head will start up again. The ability to turn breath into meaning, to connect your consciousness with others, will still be there, because you're human. And humans speak. That's what we do. That's what we are. Sleep well.